Hi everyone and welcome to another painting tutorial. So today I'm going to take you through how I painted Lieutenant Titus in secret level style. Now I just wanted to mention early on, I've only recently started using an airbrush and I currently don't have the appropriate equipment to film that as I'm unable to airbrush from my regular workstation. However, I will just take a moment to explain. So it is just a Chaos Black undercoat and then just an all-round spray of Kantor Blue Air and ABADDON Black Air 50/50. And then just some zenithal highlights of MACRAGGE Blue. Now, I really didn't overdo the MACRAGGE Blue because, for the most part, if you've seen Secret Level, the episode 5, you will notice that, of course, the schemes in it are quite dark. So that's essentially what I was going for. So as you can see in the darkest recesses, it's very much still with that ABADDON Black and Kantor Blue mix. And if you don't use an airbrush, you could of course just do this by hand as well. I would recommend, as opposed to doing edge highlights with the MACRAGGE Blue, it might be better to just do some stippling where the light would catch the model. But anyway, I'm now going to use some MACRAGGE Blue and CALGAR Blue mixed. So again, a 50/50 mix, and I'm just going to be doing some limited highlights, edge highlights of this, and also plenty of little scratches across the armor as well. So with the MACRAGGE Blue and CALGAR Blue mix now done, I'm going to use some DAWNSTONE, and again just using the DAWNSTONE for the most part just to do some scratch highlights and also some limited edge highlighting as well. So as you can see, just more additional scratches across the shoulder pads. And you can also see these lines are really fine. I'm just using the very tip of my brush and the paint is fairly watered down as well. So just continuing with DAWNSTONE, as I had applied a decent amount, however I did want to add even more as this will be the final highlight for the power armor. So just carefully adding a little bit more definition to the armour, just with some fine edge highlights and plenty more scratches. So just continuing with those DAWNSTONE scratches and edge highlights on the helmet. And also on the power supply unit. And now onto the lieutenant helmet stripes. So again, really trying to keep with that darker sort of theme. So I decided to use a base coat of VORBAK red. So essentially just working through the center and just going about 1 millimeter each side of the skull. Now, if you don't have a great deal of experience painting lieutenant helmets on Space Marines like myself, I'd highly recommend having a reference in front of you for this. I certainly did whilst painting this, as it will make it that much easier just to be able to glance up and make sure that you're doing it right. And now for the outside lines, I decided to use a base coat of CORAX white. So a minimal amount of paint on my brush and just very carefully working some thin lines there. Now if you need to go back and correct the red, you can of course just jump back to that. However, it might be a little bit more difficult correcting the blue, so I'd recommend trying to work a little bit closer to the red and just trying to make sure that you get those lines as thin as possible. And just continue to layer that up until you have a nice smooth white. And now to begin shading the white, I'm just going to use some Dark Reaper and LAHMIAN medium, looking at a 50-50 mix for this, and add a little bit of water as well. As you can see, it's fairly faint. This was just to help shade it down a little bit. And now just to begin highlighting the lieutenant stripe and also to base coat in the lenses as well. I'm just going to use some corn red. And now to further highlight the lenses and also the lieutenant stripe, I'm going to use some bold PYRROLE red by MACRAGGE. And now just for the lenses, I'm going to use some Fire Dragon Bright, and just looking at doing some very thin highlights of this just at the front of the lens, and just curve it downwards as well toward the front end of the lens there. And as a final touch for the lenses, I'm just going to use an even mix of Fire Dragon Bright and Heavy Titanium White, so Citadel and PYRROLE. However, any white will do just fine. Heavy Titanium White has just become one of my favourite whites as of only recently. It's just a really thick consistency, and you can work it down with some water as much as you want, and it just applies really smoothly. And just finishing off the lenses with some Heavy Titanium White dots. Now, this is a little bit watered down, and as you can see, barely anything on my brush, and it's using the very point of my brush. I'm just going to put in the reflective dots of the lens. Now, I just wanted to mention as well, for the lenses, when I was base coating the Lieutenant red stripe, I did fill in the lenses with VORBAK red. Alternatively, if you want it to be even darker, you can of course use black. And as a final highlight for the white stripes, again just going back to that Heavy Titanium White and just carefully painting over most of the CORAX white. And I wanted to add some battle damage to the helmet, so I'm just going to use some RHINOX hide. And to help further darken some of those scratches as well, some of the battle damage, I'm just going to deepen the recesses at the end with some ABADDON black. And for all the colours I've pointed out here, so Gull VORBAK red, Khorne red, and bold Pyrrole red, these are the three colours that I was using for the Lieutenant Pauldron here. So as you can see there, I did already apply the Gull VORBAK red and Khorne red, and just doing a final edge highlight of the bold Pyrrole red. So for all of the details and just preparing them for the next steps, I've just filled them all out with ABADDON black, and also base coating down the chainsword and the heavy bolt pistol as well. And now to base coat all of the pouches, I'm just going to use some RHINOX hide. And just see how it's looking after one coat. If you do need to apply a second, just go right ahead and apply the second coat. And to shade all the pouches, I'm just going to use some ABADDON black, and this has been heavily watered down. As you can see, it's just running in the same way as a shade would. And now to begin highlighting all of the pouches, I decided to use some DOOMBULL brown. Now obviously this is quite a vibrant, warm tone of brown. However, I will be toning that down a little bit with some cooler tones coming up. Now with the DOOMBULL brown, you sort of want this to apply in a really thin sort of manner. So I have watered this down a little bit more than the next two steps. So just aiming to apply a really thin layer of this, just as an initial edge highlight. And now I'm just going to use some TUSKGOR fur. So really just aiming for some sharp highlights here. And as a final highlight, I'm going to use some KARAK stone. So really just following over the TUSKGOR for highlights. So now to begin base coating all of the cloth and the purity seals, and this goes for the knee pad just behind the chapter symbol and also the chapter symbol itself. So I decided to use a base coat of RAKARTH flesh as I really wanted that sort of ivory tone. And now once again using some Dark Reaper and LAHMIAN medium, again looking at a 50-50 mix, and add plenty of water. I'm just going to begin shading all of the RAKARTH flesh. So as you can see, I did go a little bit heavy on the Dark Reaper shade. However, I'm going to tidy all of that up now. So I'm just going back to RAKARTH flesh. So if I was to do that step again, I would have likely chosen, let's say 20% Dark Reaper to 80% LAHMIAN medium and some water, just to make it a really, really thin shade. As yeah, I just wasn't too happy with how dark the recesses here looked. So with the tidy up of the RAKARTH flesh now done, I'm going to use some bone. This is the Pro Acryl Signature Series range. I looked at a few other colours initially. Originally I was going to use a mix of RAKARTH flesh and Pallid Witch flesh. However, I really liked the fact that the bone almost looked as though it was just a couple of shades lighter than the RAKARTH flesh, as I really wanted this to just be a sort of just a natural sort of cloth with a very gradual build up of colour. And now just to begin painting the Gothic text, Ultra, I'm just going to use some Corvus black. So as you can see, just doing really thin lines. So freehand painting text, it really is just one of those things that you have to consistently practice for a considerable amount of time, in my opinion, before being able to get it right. I still feel as though I'm miles away from getting it really nice. Definitely when I look at some of the freehand text out there. However, it's definitely something just to continue practicing, and Space Marines are really great for that, as there are always plenty of purity seals and other details where you can do this sort of text. But as you can see, just using the tip of my brush and barely anything on the brush as well, and it is fairly watered down, just to sort of maximize the control. And at the very least on Lieutenant Titus as well, there are 2 purity seals here covering some of the detail, as you can see. So the L and the T are a little bit easier to do. And just always make sure that you're positioning your miniature in the most comfortable way. And if you do need to go back and correct any of the Corvus black, as you can see I'm doing that right now, you can just go back to either the RAKARTH flesh or the bone and just carefully thin down those lines a little bit. So as you can see, just working through the center of the text. I'd really recommend looking into Gothic text as well. It's a really good way just to gauge how the text is sort of supposed to look. So as far as the text goes, for the purposes of the tutorial, I'll just be showing the Ultra. But just use the Corvus Black as well for all of the purity seals. And I'm also just going to use some Corvus Black to begin highlighting all of the other black details, such as the bolt pistol and the chainsword. And I decided I wanted to highlight the cloth further, and this will apply for some edge highlights as well for the purity seals and the chapter symbol as well, just all of the ivory details in general. So just gradually building up the ivory on the most raised areas of the cloth. And for the hilt of the chainsword and all of the purity seals, all of the wax I should say, I'm just going to base coat those with BARAK-NAR Burgundy. And for the heavy bolt pistol and the chainsword, I'm just going to further highlight those with ESHIN grey. And also just adding plenty of fine scratches to the chainsword, just to give that further sort of battle-worn appearance, and also some really small little scratches there. And as a final highlight for those, I'm just going to use some DAWNSTONE. And also as a final highlight for the wax of the purity seals. And at this point, I should mention as well, thanks to Vince Venturella, as it's something that I've struggled with basically since I got back into painting, metallics losing their shine. Now, I've started varnishing my miniatures prior to painting on the metallics, so I did airbrush on some matte varnish, which was just a mix of, Vallejo satin, so 1 part of that, to 3 parts of AK Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish. So I just measured that out in an empty mixer bottle, and using some airbrush thinner and airbrush flow improver, I just sprayed that on, give it some time to dry, and then I move on to my metallics. So with all of the gunmetal, I just did a base coat of black metal and thrash metal 50-50. So that's by scale 75, and then to base coat all of the gold areas, I just decided to use the darkest gold from the gold series set, which is NECRO gold. And again, keeping with that overall dark theme, I decided just to use some INKTENSE black, again by scale 75. And this will be going over all of the gold and all of the gunmetal as well. And as the one and only highlight for all of the gunmetal, I decided just to use some heavy metal, again by scale 75. And finishing off all of the gold with ELVEN gold by scale 75. So really just trying to capture all of those most raised areas where the light would be hitting. And then just doing some edge highlighting as well. So the miniature is just about finished at this point. As you can see, I've glued on all of the parts. I decided one thing was missing though, so I decided to use some Blood for the Blood God, a technical paint by Citadel. So I've just put a little bit of this down on my wet palette after a good shake. I haven't watered it down further or anything like that. And just going to do some small flicks of the blood and also just sort of blob it around some of the chainsword as well. And as with metallics, I wouldn't recommend varnishing over the Blood for the Blood God, as it does have a really glossy finish. So unless you freehand paint over some gloss varnish, whether that's by Citadel, so Ardcode, or any of the other gloss varnishes available, I'd recommend only doing that. So just applying a little bit of that over the Blood for the Blood God. But if you do use a matte varnish, or essentially anything below the gloss varnish in terms of shine, in my opinion it will take away from that sort of blood effect that makes it look more realistic. And as is the case with blood spatter, it does sort of just go everywhere, so making this look as randomly sort of sprayed as you can, so small little dots here and there, random little lines going every which way. And here are some photos of Lieutenant Titus secret level style. So I hope you found this tutorial useful today. I had a great time doing this tutorial. I'll have plenty more new painting tutorials coming in the near future. So as always everyone, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. As I mentioned in my last video, 2024 was a really good year for me. I'm really looking forward to this year. And just to mention as well, if you are in Australia and you need any of the paints I used in this video or brushes at a discounted price, head over to Gap Games through the link in the description. It does support the channel. Thank you again. I will see you again in the next one.